Hello, this is your host, Austin Hopkins, and welcome to the Introvert Leader Podcast. Welcome to episode 9, Asking for a Raise. Really pumped to have you guys here today. We're almost at that 10 episode mark, so getting excited for that milestone. Although I don't know how big of a milestone it is, but for me it is. So excited about that and super pumped to have you guys here for this episode. It's going to be focused on everything having to do with asking for a raise, right? And I don't mean asking for a raise when you're taking on a new job. I mean just asking for a raise in your current job. So really pumped to kind of get into that in a few minutes. But before that, I want to give you guys a quick update on me. Recently, I've been into house music, I guess I'd call it dance music. Just really good for kind of pumping you up, doing a workout. Just really been enjoying that. I don't necessarily have a favorite artist, but I use the Spotify made for you house playlist. So it's been really, really good recently and I've been enjoying it. And YouTube content, I have been watching a guy, I've been watching for a while, but his name is a cook named Matt. He's on YouTube. He's a food YouTuber and from Seattle, so my home state. And he's just really fun. I don't know why. I like his vibe. I like his style. I think he's got a kind of a non-pretentious way to make food, even though he came from a culinary background. So if you haven't watched his stuff, I'd recommend it. I think you'd enjoy it. And then what I've been watching, like TV-wise, is the new show Silo on Apple TV. The deck is stacked, as they say, in regards to actors. Really, really good actors in the show, and I've just been enjoying it. It's kind of weird. Essentially, all of these folks are living underground, and that's all I'll tell you because I don't want to give anything away if you haven't watched it. But highly recommend that as well. And so before we jump into it, I had to share a really funny story that happened a couple of days ago. So we're in the kitchen cooking, me and my wife. We're doing one of our favorite dinners, some taco bowls. And she had just got done cutting some jalapenos. I didn't know this. And she went to blow her nose, scratch her nose because the allergies in New York have been crazy. And immediately she starts screaming in pain. And I'm a little confused, right? Because my back is turned and she's screaming, I can't breathe. I can't breathe. So I say, go outside, thinking like it's the fumes from the onions or the jalapenos or whatever. Boy, was I wrong. Eventually, through the miscommunication, I figure out she has no trouble breathing at all. It's just that she has touched her nose after cutting those super, super spicy jalapenos. And this was World War III. All hell broke loose. It was crazy. She was freaking out. I didn't know what to do to help her, right? I quickly grabbed my phone. I realized, okay, I got to look up a remedy, Austin. You got to be Johnny on the spot. You got to be quick. And so I start looking and find out that milk is a good option. But then I'm running over to the fridge, and as I'm running over there, I realize, wait a second, we don't drink milk. We drink almond milk. That's not going to work. So then I'm back to square one, and I'm thinking, well, what else is going to work? What else is going to work? Keep doing a little Google search and find out that yogurt is a good remedy. So I run back to the fridge. I grab our biggest container of non-fat Chobani Greek yogurt, the good stuff, folks, and I start smothering her face with yogurt all over it. And she's shouting in pain, but she's also laughing because she knows she looks super, super, super crazy. And I swear by the end of this thing, she looked like Robin Williams in Mrs. Doubtfire. But she started to get a little pain relief. And then like an hour later, she was back to her normal self. But the moral of the story is yogurt is good for more than just a snack. And don't touch your face after messing with jalapenos. But had to share that funny story that was cracking us up over the last couple of days. All right, guys, moving on. Want to talk about asking for a raise. So why even talk about that, right? And I think the answer is obvious. We all want to make more money, right? I think that's a universal truth. Most people want to make more money than they're making now. But I guess the deeper reason is that I don't believe most folks realize that they can ask for a raise in their current role, right? Maybe they don't realize they can do it, or maybe they're uncomfortable about it. But that's kind of where I come in, right? I want to share with you some strategies that not only have worked for myself, but I've seen it work for others. And, of course, as always, I'm speaking from personal experience. So let's go ahead and jump into it. So before you ask for a raise, couple caution things, right? 2 things I want you to think about. First, what's the reason that you might be wanting to ask for a raise? If the answer to that is, hey, I'm not happy in my current role, I'm not happy at the company, I'm sorry to say, a raise is not going to fix that, right? If you are not happy with the culture, or if you're not happy in the job that you've chosen to do, no matter how much money you get paid, you are not going to be happy. You're not going to be fulfilled. So number one, if that is your reason for asking for a raise, take it from me. Don't ask for the raise. Don't waste your time and go look for a new job. The second thing is ask yourself this question. Do you deserve to be paid more? So a couple of questions you might want to ask yourself is, are you meeting the basic requirements for the job? And then are you going above and beyond? Right? So if you're doing the basic requirements for the job that you were, negotiated for and agreed to do that job and get paid a salary in the beginning, and you're not doing anything more than that, from my experience, I don't think it makes sense for you to ask for a raise because you are not doing anything above and beyond. And how I like to view it is you kind of signed into a contract when you started that job saying, I'm going to do X and you're going to pay me this amount, right? That being said, if you are meeting those basic requirements and you're going above and beyond, then absolutely, I think it's time to look at asking for a raise. But just know that an employer won't even consider giving you a raise if you're not going above and beyond. I can't stress that enough. I've seen so many folks and my employees in the past that I've worked with that have come to me and say, hey, I want to make more money. And the first thing we'll do is look at their performance. And they haven't been meeting their performance metrics for months, and yet they want to be paid more. So I think in those situations, it's up to a good manager to say, hey, you're not really meeting expectations. Here are the things you can do to meet expectations, and then let's have a conversation about it, right? So those are the two things I always want to caution folks before they even ask for a raise. Number one, make sure you have clarity on the reason for asking for it. And remember, money doesn't, solve for happiness or solve for being in the job that's not right for you. And then the second thing is, are you even eligible for a raise? So assuming that you are eligible, right, and you're meeting expectations, you're going above and beyond, I think it's really, really important that you have good preparation, right? Just with anything, the preparation is what separates average from the top tier folks. So let's go ahead and transition and talk about how you can prepare to ask for a raise. Okay, so I think it all starts with knowing what your salary worth is. Now, I spent a little time on the last episode talking about that, so I don't want to go super deep into it. But again, the ways you can find out what you are worth is look at all of the resources on the internet, such as Glassdoor, PayScale, Indeed, LinkedIn, and you can start to see what roles similar to yours or your exact role pays, given your experience and where you live. Always talk to friends as well is another way to do it. But number one, you need to know your salary worth. And the reason that's important is if you are asking for more than what you're worth and what the job pays, right? Let's say the job you're doing pays $50,000 and you're asking for $300,000. I know it's a crazy example, but it wouldn't make any sense for you to ask for $300,000 if you're making $50,000, right? The job you're doing does not justify that high salary. So number one, got to know your worth, right? So take some time, figure out what you're worth. So let's say though, you've figured that out. The next thing is you need to determine what your goal is. What is your goal for this salary increase, right? Are you asking for 5%? Are you asking for 10%? Are you asking for it to happen right away? Are you flexible? Those are the kind of things you need to figure out, right? And I will say going through this whole thing, flexibility is going to be important. So once you have a good idea of what your goal is, right? And I think for me, from personal experiences, I wanted to ask for something that I thought would not cause too many feathers to ruffle within HR. And I wanted to ask for enough to where I felt like I was being paid commensurate with my value, right? So after you know your goal, after you know your worth, I think it's really important that you understand your company, right? So if you're working at a company, my hope is that you understand what the big initiatives are, the big goals for the company. But I think it's really important as well that you know the problems and the obstacle the company is facing. And you might ask yourself, well, okay, I know these things, but why is that important, Austin? And I'll tell you, the reason why it's important is when you go into that conversation to ask for a raise, I like to think of it almost like a sales conversation. It's not a full sales conversations, but you definitely are trying to, I don't want to say convince, but maybe persuade or show someone else to see a perspective. And the best way to do that is to tie your value to a problem or goal and how you're helping fix that or how you're helping that obstacle to be overcome, right? And so understand, what is the company working on right now? What are the big obstacles? Maybe the company really, really is lacking in growth, right? They need a way to grow into new markets. They're not getting enough customers, whatever it may be. Know that, right? So then you can use that information when it comes time to have the raise conversation later. What are the big goals for the company? What are the big things that the company is trying to achieve in the next 6 to 12 months? And how in your role, no matter where you are in the company, how in your role can you support that? So again, really, really important that you know your company, what are the big things they're working on? What are the big obstacles, problems? That will help you out tremendously. So after you know your company, right, you've worked there, you understand, you've taken some time to jot those thoughts down, it's always important to have the right mindset. I can't stress to you enough the importance of mindset. I truly believe with all of my heart that having a strong mindset in these key moments in your life will separate you from so many others. I can't tell you how many people I've known that go into these situations assuming the worst, assuming it won't work out. They go in with what I like to call a scarcity mindset. And when I say scarcity mindset is thinking there's not enough, it won't work out, and it's going to be too tough. You got to get those things out of your mind. No matter, even if deep, deep, deep down you have insecurities, which by the way, we all do. Even the most confident people have insecurities, even when they put on that brave face. Doesn't matter. You need to go into these situations with the right mindset. So a couple things you can do to make sure your mindset is just in a great place. Number one, don't be desperate, right? Do not be desperate. You're not desperate to get this raise. You may have bills that you can't pay, right? And you may be out of options, but at the end of the day, you're not. This job is not the only job out there. There are hundreds of thousands of other jobs that you can apply for. Again, like I said this on the last episode, that's not to say it's going to be easy to find a new job, that it might happen quickly, but I will just say the job you're in is not the end all be all, and don't forget that. That's so important. Right. And trust me, I've been in situations where I can't pay my bills. In fact, I was talking with my wife about this the other day. When I was in my early 20s, I was not smart with money. I'm going to tell you that right now. I was not good with money. And there were times where I struggled to pay my bills, right? I would play it too close, right? I was working full time, but I was not being smart with my money. So I understand the pressure of having bills that you can't pay. But I also understand that a job is a job at the end of the day. You're not your job. You're not defined by that job. So go out and find a new one. And don't be desperate, right? Bringing it back. Don't be desperate. Desperation is a surefire way for you to lose out on a raise, and it just doesn't come across well to the other person. So now that we've established you're not desperate, okay, you got that ready to go in your mind. The next one is you need to have that same team mindset, same as the last, right? Same as the last episode where we talked about this. It's important to remember that you and your manager are on the same team, literally, right? You and your manager are on the same team. So when you go through the process, this isn't you versus them, you versus HR. This is collaborative, right? Again, be collaborative, be likable, be agreeable, be confident, right? Of course, but make it, again, as collaborative a process as possible. And I mentioned confidence. That's the last one. You have to go into these situations thinking it will work out. And you have to go into these situations knowing that you're worth what you're asking for. Right? And I like to tell this to my wife and friends is if you don't believe it in your heart, then why in the heck would somebody else believe it? Like you have to be the very best representation of this situation. You can't assume that they're going to push for the raise as hard as you. So be confident that's going to work out. You are valuable. And at the end of the day, again, if the company doesn't see your value, you can go somewhere else. Right? I just want people to realize you are not tied to the same job for the rest of your life. You can move around. In fact, I might even do a whole episode on the value of switching companies strategically, because that's where the real money comes in, is moving to a new company and getting more money, right? That being said, I get it. Sometimes you're really happy at your company and you want to ask for a raise. So having the right type of mindset is really, really going to help. So, right, you've got the right mindset. You're not desperate. You've got the same team mindset. You're confident. Knowing all that, now the next part is you need to understand what your value is, and you need to be able to articulate that. So I want to talk about something I like to call a brag sheet. I didn't come up with this name, but essentially I've used it anytime I've asked for a raise, and I use it in every single job I've had probably for the last 6 years. And essentially it's a document that I create that highlights and outlines all of the things that I'm doing above my basic job requirements. So I'll pause there. Why do you think that's important to do that? Well, number one, people forget things, right? I mean, I have a horrible memory, ADD. I've talked about that before. I forget things from 2 days ago. So you want me to remember something that I did 8 months ago? Unless I write it down, it ain't happening. I ain't going to remember that, right? So really important to write this down so you don't forget it. Number two, I think sometimes we take for granted things that we do, things that maybe come easy to us, but are special to others. We don't even think they're a big deal. So going through the time to write down all of the things that you've done, right? And I'll give you examples. The list of the projects you've done, the assignments, the initiatives that you've either led or added significant value or support to, the list of results in your current role, right? You should be exceeding your expectations again to ask for a raise. So have your numbers. What have you done over the last year? Right? Maybe you've won some awards or received good emails or recognition from folks. Have that stuff, right? There's no better way to brag about yourself than having someone else do it for you, right? And when I say brag, I don't mean bringing any ego into this, right? This is not an ego moment. This is just saying, hey, I've worked hard and I'd like to be recognized for what I've done. Right? So some things that you could have on there is maybe you've mentored some people throughout the company. Maybe you've won an award at your company. Maybe you've successfully launched a project that added value to the company. Again, as you're doing this brag sheet, make sure to remember how you can tie it back to the company's organizational goals, priorities, and as well the obstacles or problems. Again, those tie in, that connecting is going to be really, really important as you present your case. Okay, so you understand your value, right? And I think that's important that you do that. If you haven't done that already, start doing it right now. And don't rush this process, right? Get really, really creative. I don't want you to be rigid as you're doing your brag sheet. You can pare that down later. The first pass is just to get really, really loose and free write, as they say, as many different things you think you've done above and beyond. And then I would strongly suggest that you start doing this no matter if you're going to ask for a raise, just moving forward, right? This document can become really helpful as it comes time to those end of year review processes, right? I think we've all gone through those where at the end of the year, you get to review how you did over the year. Having this information is going to help you and your boss have a really important conversation. You're going to be able to point to those things that have added value. So knowing your value, super, super, super important, right? So now that you've known your value, you've got the right mindset, and you've also prepared, right? You've prepared by knowing the company, your goal, your worth, etc. Now it's time to actually get going on asking for the raise, right? But again, super important, you've done all these things before that. So here's what you're going to do. When you're going to approach this topic with your boss, I want you to do it the right way that doesn't create friction and doesn't put your boss in a moment of surprise or worry. So what you're going to do is you're going to casually go up to your boss, maybe during your one-on-one, or maybe it's passing in the hall, whatever it is. And you're going to say, hey, Tony, for example, I'd love to chat with you during our next one-on-one about my compensation. I have some thoughts and wanted to have an open dialogue with you. And then just stop right there. Your boss may want to ask you what about and get more details, but that's not the right time to do it. What you're going to say is, hey man, I just wanted to give you a heads up, give you some time to make sure that we're both ready to go to have that conversation next week. Again, this is going to give them time and take the pressure off, because I will tell you, as a boss, as a leader, as a manager, I've had this happen before where someone will just come into my desk and you can tell there's some high emotions, right? They're nervous to ask for a raise, and they burst in and say, hey, I need a raise. And me as the leader, I'm a little taken back. I'm shocked, right? This isn't something the employee has told me in the past. So it makes me a little uncomfortable, and maybe I'm not as prepared as I want to be. So again, give your boss some time to prepare. Don't put it on them and don't shock them in the moment. Maybe in the meantime, they go to HR and they find out what wiggle room they might have. But if you just went to them and sprung it on them, maybe their initial reaction would be no, right? So again, tell your boss you want to have a conversation in the next week. Don't make it more than 2 weeks out, right? Because you want to keep that momentum going. Okay, so you've scheduled that meeting and that meeting is coming, right? You're ready to go. So again, you're going to start that meeting by sharing your goal, right? And how I always like to do that is by saying, hey, Tony, I'd love to talk today about my compensation and the value I provide, right? Then what you're going to do is you're going to go over what the market value for your position, for you in this role, right? I'm worth X in the market given my experience and expertise and the size of our company, et cetera, right? So share the value. And then the next thing is you're going to go through the brag sheet, and you're going to go through line by line and pause and see if your boss has any questions or maybe they need clarity. But again, you're sharing your goal. You're going over, hey, here's the market value showing that I'm not being paid what I think I'm worth. And here are all the reasons why I believe I'm eligible or deserve to make a little bit more money. Okay, so you've had the conversation. Hopefully you have a boss that is receptive and will listen and not, give you a no right in the moment. I think in most cases, people are willing to listen, assuming that you've set it up the right way and you've really kind of put those bookends on the meeting by sharing your goal and then recapping at the end, I should say. So you've had your meeting. Another really important step to do is to do some follow-up, right? And so what that looks like is you're going to make sure that you guys have some next steps scheduled, right? So maybe you're going to meet in 2 weeks from now, you're going to meet in a month, whatever it is. But what I'd strongly suggest is send your boss an email thanking them, right? Take an extra second and say, hey man, I appreciate you having that conversation with me. Because at the end of the day, regardless what happens, right? They took the time to meet with you. So I think it's the right thing to do. And in that email, you're going to include your brag sheet again, so that they have that. So that when your boss goes to talk to HR, they're going to have that information with them, right? So they're not going to have to remember it or ask for it later. So really, those are the steps to the process. Set up the meeting with your boss, provide some context, have the meeting, be prepared, show them what you've done, and then follow up. Okay, so let's say you've done that, but it didn't go your way, right? Your boss came back to you and your boss said, hey, I get what you prepared, Austin, but it's just not going to work to give you a raise right now. I want you to not fret. I don't want you to get depressed in that moment. I don't want you to get sad. What I want you to do is take a moment, control your emotions, and realize, okay, it might be a no right now, but it's not a no forever, and I'm not out of options. Right? So in those moments, you then need to realize, okay, does this company see my value? If so, what are my next steps? Or B, this company doesn't see my value. Great. Now I know I need to go and quit, right? I need to go find something else. But let's assume that the company sees your value. You like the company, the culture, your boss, whatever it is, and you want to stick it out. What I want you to do is I want you to put a follow-up meeting in the future on the calendar with your boss. So say something like this. Hey, Tony, I totally understand. I'm disappointed, but I understand that, given the market right now and our company's, balance sheet, we really have to be careful with these kind of things. So that being said, what I'd love to do is set something up in the future that we can make sure to reevaluate and talk about this again. How does 3 months from now sound? How does 6 months from now sound, right? You pick the number. And then ask, what are the things that I can do in between now and then to make sure that I'm better positioned to secure a raise? Right? Are there projects? Are there assignments I can take on? You're going to ask for those things, right? The reason why this is important is, number one, you've got something on the calendar. So there's no getting out of it. Your boss can't forget about it. You can't forget about it, right? So it shows, hey, this is important to me. I want to talk about it again. And two, you're kind of getting the cheat codes of what you can do to get the raise. Your boss is going to tell you, yeah, you got to do 2 or 3 things. Here are the things you need to do, Austin, to stand out amongst your peers and potentially get a raise. This is valuable information. So get this information, put it on the calendar. Again, be gracious, thank your boss, and start getting to work, right? If there's those projects, assignments he wants you to work on, start doing them. Start showing them that you're doing them and add it to the brag sheet. So assuming you've done all that, right, and you're going to repeat the same process, you're going to prepare, make sure you have the right mindset, give your boss the context of the meeting, have the meeting, follow up. And I'm confident that if you do those things, you're going to be able to get a raise. And the reason I'm confident you can do it is because I've done it. And what I'd love to do is tell you a story to wrap up of how it went for me. So years and years ago, I was working at a company and I was feeling a little underpaid, right? I knew I needed to do something about it. And at the time, I felt like I could stay at the company, but I needed to be, again, paid commensurate with the value that I provided, right? I wanted to make sure that I was feeling like the company could recognize my efforts, right? So at the time, I had never known anyone who had asked for a random raise, but I figured there's got to be some content out there for me to learn more about the process. So I did what I always do, and I started researching. So I spent hours combing the web, listening to podcasts, YouTubes, articles to learn whatever I could about the process of asking for a raise. And to my delight, there was actually some decent amount of content out there. Some of it was good. A lot of it was bad. But either way, I learned a ton about the process, but I was still scared, right? As you guys know, I'm a people pleaser. I hate to make people uncomfortable. It's literally my worst nightmare. And, I knew that it was going to maybe make my boss uncomfortable. But at the end of the day, I went back to the motto, right? Which is taking risks so that I don't have regrets, right? Again, I knew that if it didn't work out, it didn't work out, but taking the risk was going to be much, much better than having regrets later. And I knew I was worth more, right? That also helps, right? I was confident that I was adding value. And I can say without ego that I was a top performer in that company, right? I was maniacally focused on adding value all over the company. I consistently exceeded my goals. I had built really strong and rewarding relationships with so many amazing folks. For example, I was consistently asked to take on like super high visibility projects. I was constantly receiving positive feedback from the C-suite, and like I even won an award, right? And again, I don't say that with ego. I really, really worked hard and blessed to have good people around me, but I was a top performer. And, all that being said, I felt I was being paid less than the value I provided. And I had a good friend, and he always had this saying. He called it the even value exchange, which I really liked. And he always said he didn't want to be paid a penny more or a penny less than what he was worth. And I really liked that, and I felt the same in that moment. So I did exactly what I told you guys I was teaching earlier, which was I followed the process. So I requested a meeting with my boss, right? I prepared. I understood what my worth was. I had my brag sheet. I had everything ready to go. And I said, hey, I'd love to meet with you in a couple of weeks, right? And I remember seeing his face when I requested this and said, hey, I'd like to talk about my compensation. He looked nervous and surprised, but that didn't bother me, right? Because I made sure to give him a week heads up, and I knew this was important to me. So day of the meeting comes, I'm ready to go, got the brag sheet, and I even had multiple examples that like tied into the company's core values, the things that they were focusing on, which I thought was cool. And I outlined to my boss that I felt I was being paid less than, the value I was adding. And I went on to share the brag sheet line by line, pausing to ask for questions. And to my boss's credit, he actually listened. And he actually asked, what did I think I was worth? And I told him I thought I was worth about $15K more than what I was being paid. Right? I shared my findings within the market, and then we kind of wrapped up by talking about next steps. Right? And I'll be honest with you, then the next process took a while. Right? In fact, it probably took 5 to 7 months between meetings with my boss, him working with HR, us all three talking, you name it, right? I am happy to say though, and eventually I did get a raise. And I remember my boss, called me in to share that I was getting a raise, and I felt so stinking good. I don't think I've ever felt better in a moment. I felt like I was on cloud nine, that I could literally accomplish anything as long as I was prepared and had the right mindset. And, I'll share, I didn't get the full 15K, right? But I got enough to feel as if the company was starting to acknowledge my value a little bit more. And this was a really big step in my career because, again, this was a risk, something that I didn't think everybody was doing, and I didn't even know anyone who had done it. But I figured, shoot, man, I can try this. If it doesn't work, who gives a crap? If it doesn't work out, I'll go do something else, or maybe I'll just bide my time until something else comes up, right? So it was a big step. I really, really, I'm proud of that moment. And, my goal is to help you guys listening do the same thing, because if you're getting underpaid and you're adding a ton of value, I know what it feels like. It does not feel good to be paid less than what you think you are worth. So my challenge this week, guys, to wrap up is, I want you to look at your worth, your value, and if you're not being paid what you think you're worth, I want you to go ahead and request that meeting with your boss. You're going to be a little nervous. You're going to be maybe concerned on what they're going to say. But if you use the strategies I outlined, I guarantee you, you are going to find some success, whether it is getting a raise or getting the clarity to know maybe it's time to look for something new. So thank you so much for listening. And as usual, I'd love if you would leave a review or a rating on whatever platform you listen to podcasts, or tell a friend about it, right? I'd love to help more people understand how they can maximize their career and become the best version of themselves. So again, thank you for listening, and make it a great day. The Introvert Leader Podcast. Subscribe for new episodes every other Wednesday.